Thank you for being here.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm okay to share my screen, yeah? Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. It worked a minute ago. What about that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I shall make a start. Hello, everybody. Afternoon. Thanks for the introduction, Maya. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about hairy-nosed otters from my point of view. A couple of caveats here. I am in no way an expert on hairy-nosed otters. There are people far more qualified, certainly out in the field and research and in range country areas that have a vast knowledge. Not many of us, not many of them, but they are out there. So I'm just going to go through my story of how I got to kind of working with hairy-nosed otters and what we're doing as a kind of a group of people trying to promote the species and kind of bring together our shared knowledge for the species. My title photo here is a very old print. Keep an eye on it because it will pop back up shortly, and it's quite an interesting picture as we go through the history. So who am I? As Maya zoos, Battersea Park Children's Zoo in London, which is it's the UK's only dedicated children's zoo. So we have lots of small animals, specifically designed zoo for kind of 0 to 8, 9-year-old children, very heavily into conservation and education. So we can get the kids at a very early age. We do have otters there, as well as a lot of other species. I'm also curator for New Forest Wildlife Park down in the south of England, and we specialize in UK native species, UK and European native species, as well as a lot of otters. Historically, we've always held otters. So currently we have 4 species. So we do a lot of otters. And I think I'm right in saying we have more otters and species of otters than any other zoo in the world. So this is me with an otter friend. That's what I look like. And my other passion, apart from zoos and animals and otters, is traveling. So I'm quite familiar with certainly Southeast Asia, Africa, and various other parts of the world. Been very, very lucky enough to travel around and see various places and its wildlife. So I have a good backing in travel and zoos, which has helped me, I think, get to where I am today. And as mentioned, I'm also part of the Otter Specialist Group, which is a privilege and an honor to be part of. It's a very hardworking, very active group, as you all know. There's a lot goes on, one of the most proactive SSC groups around. I'm kind of up there at the top, I suppose. I like to think I'm up there at the top. So I kind of sit in a position where I liaise between the ex situ world and the in situ world. So I kind of keep an eye on all the zoos and all the otters around the world if I can. It's quite a hard job. I tend to focus now more on kind of Southeast Asian species. But if I'm asked, then I will help out on any of the 14 species if needed, and particularly when it comes to kind of ex situ care, husbandry, breeding recommendations, rescue, rehabilitation, that sort of thing. I've got a good backing in that area, so that's where my expertise lays. I'm also liaison between the OSG and the EAZA, so between the Otter Specialist Group and the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So I feed down the line to the zoo world as to what the IUCN wants in terms of conservation for otters, what's going on, the research, the collaborations, the scientific stuff, the field work. I can feed that back into the zoo world, so we have a more coordinated picture about what's going on both in and ex situ. My main, I suppose, remit within that is for the Southeast Asian otters. So as you all know, there are 4 species: Asian short-clawed, smooth-coated, Eurasian, and hairy-nosed. We don't have any hairy-nosed otters in the European zoos. There are actually only 4 in captivity that we know of. Most of my work, therefore, is with the other more common species, so Asian short-clawed, of which there are an awful lot in our zoos around the world. And I also sit on species committees for smooth-coated and Eurasian. So I have a good backing in Southeast Asian otters, care, husbandry, and rescue and rehabilitation. I also look after the global population of Asian shortclaws. So that encompasses North America, Australia, Japan, Southeast Asia. So again, a lot of otters, 1 species. It's a bit of a challenge, but I enjoy it, and it is working. We are bringing the zoos together. We're making otters more high-profile species, and that links back into helping them in the wild and the work that's going on in the wild. So Asian shortclaws, here's Rudy, one of our little ex-pet otters. He was an absolute superstar. Had a lot of respect for him. And this is the Asian short-clawed. It's quite interesting, actually, as I go through my pictures. I can easily see the differences between certainly the 4 species of Southeast Asian otter, and it's quite common that I am sent photographs, video footage, asking to identify what species it is. It's quite common, particularly in the wild, in field kind of camera trap surveys. Misidentification takes a lot, is quite common. So again, part of my remit is to kind of help with that, kind of pin down what species people are seeing on their camera traps. Eurasian otter, we only had 1 at the park. There's a lovely guy called Chestnut. Again, nice photo. We don't just take photos, pretty photos of otters, although it is nice. It's nice to be able to send an otter out. You can clearly see his lovely nose there, which isn't hairy. It's got a nice W shape on it. His general head shape is quite different to the other otter species. So again, good in terms of identification for species. And adding on to that, we do a lot of kind of, I'd say, research and kind of logging information on our otters, which again, the more we can do this with the species we hold, the better positioned we are to help when it comes to rescue, rehabilitation, kind of wild cubs being found, that sort of thing. We know their growth weights, we know their weights. We can then mark this down, record it, and then we can send it off if it's required by rescue centres in Southeast Asia when they're getting the cubs in. And again, identification. What you're seeing is a baby smooth-coated otter. At that age, a couple of weeks old, regardless of the species, they all look pretty much identical. It's really hard to tell them apart, and this is a big problem when they're coming into rescue centres, particularly with hairy-nosed, because they are so, we think, environmentally sensitive. They're really, really prone to stress. So with all 4 species, if we don't get the care right from day 1, it can go catastrophically wrong. So a lot of people outside the zoo world think an otter is an otter is an otter. They all look after the same. They all do the same thing. They all eat the same thing. They all eat fish. That's it. There are unique differences between the 4 species, between all the species. So as much as we can catalogue that and record it, it will help science and people actually in the field. And we'll do that through the entire growth stage. So as the otters get older, we'll continue to record. We make sure we're kind of taking good photographic records. So again, what you're seeing is a family group of smoothcoats. It could be in the wild. It is actually in captivity. But again, it's a good way of sending those photos out and getting the otters identified. Even do it with our giants. So our giants get regular health checks. We can do sort of ultrasounds, x-rays. We just had a giant otter recently reach 19 years of age, which is, I think, is probably one of the longest living captive recorded giant otters. And all the time we're increasing husbandry techniques, we're increasing veterinary care. We can keep otters longer this will hopefully have a knock-on effect in the future if hairy-nosed otters start coming into captivity via rescues or any other source. Hairy-nosed particularly we know is going to be difficult because we just cannot keep them in captivity. I will come to that a little bit later. So again, with the giants, we'll record them, weighing, measuring, vet checks, just to make sure everything's healthy and everybody's happy. And again, we can feed that back to South America, the rewilding programs if they need it. If they want data on otters, we have it there for giants. So going back to this, the 4 species, obviously I was already doing 3, working quite hard with the 3 Asian species of otter. And this kind of started to grow a little bit. And the hairy-nosed otter kind of started to filter into this, basically because it was a big unknown. It's a big, massive gap when it comes to information on hairy-nosed otters, and it kind of was sitting there on my sidelines. The information just isn't there. It's just nothing. It's scattered, it's fragmented, even if it's there at all. So I spent a lot of time in the Zoological Society of London Library, scanning through old books, papers, documents, started to collect on the Asian short claws mainly, and Eurasian. And I got to kind of learn that there was a good historical backing on those species. But again, looking at those, I could go back easily and find records of London Zoo taking in Asian short-clawed otters in 1882. No problem at all. Trying to find a hairy-nosed otter record, virtually impossible anywhere in the world. So that kind of got my brain ticking, and started to kind of poke around and look into what was going on. Why was this particular species so undocumented? And at the same time this was going on, I had a request from the EAZA, so European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, kind of, we'd worked together on the other 3 species, and they actually requested that I start looking officially into hairy-nosed otters. Not so much as a standard EEP. So an EEP is an endangered species breeding program. It's where we actually document, catalogue, calculate how best we're going to look after a species in captivity. We usually have a breeding population, a captive population somewhere, whether it be in Europe, North America, or in range countries. And then we can start actively doing an in situ program for conservation. This wasn't going to happen with hairy-nosed. Firstly, zoos don't take animals out of the wild anymore, or they do very rarely, only extreme circumstances. The second thing is, as we learned very quickly, hairy-nosed otters have never been kept in captivity very well. And when they have, they do not last very well. They do not do well, unlike the other 3 species. So again, it was something to look into. There was obviously something going on there, and we need to find out why. So EAZA asked me to kind of start setting up an EEP in terms of data collection. So to start collecting as much information on this species as possible, both in situ, in the wild, its range, why it hasn't, if it has been kept historically, if it hasn't, everything, as much data as possible, food, diet, housing requirements, starting to put it together into a kind of manageable knowledge database that we could then share if and when the time ever was needed, that we needed to kind of look into captive care, or certainly within the rehabilitation due to the illegal pet trade. So that's what I've started to work on. First thing obviously was to kind of look into, okay, in the wild, my general remit is captive care, so husbandry, zoo-based things. So in situ work where things live is very important, and I'm very interested in it. But starting to learn about hairy-nosed otters, what's their ideal habitat? Where do they naturally live? And the main consensus was, the main body of papers that I came across was peat swamp forests, lowland flooded forests, wetlands, rivers, canals, and shallow freshwater bodies. So very wet, dense tropical areas, and possibly going into mangroves and shallow coastal waters. So that kind of gave me a start as to where to start looking, or what the papers were saying, the research papers were saying where these animals were living. If we then look at kind of peat swamp forest, peatland areas in Southeast Asia, there's a pretty good map of what exists, what's left today. They're quite scattered. Obviously, you've got quite a chunk in Sumatra, Borneo, and then all the way over to kind of Papua New Guinea, Irian Jaya. But obviously, we know, or we think they know, they don't range that far. So our concentration for looking for these animals and the habitat they live in would be kind of Borneo, Sumatra, up into Malaysia and into Thailand. And you've also got a little bit up into Cambodia. So that kind of matches with the countries that we were finding them in historically and currently. It's a good map of kind of what environment we were kind of looking to potentially protect and look after or study, survey. This work has already been going on. So there's loads of people out there with camera traps all across Southeast Asia, picking otters up of all 4 species, logging them. So we kind of, that's already going on. The work's already going on, but kind of bringing all that work together. And obviously with such a wide geographic range, there's people working all over the place. We just need a slightly more cohesive approach for the species. That's what your pretty much typical peatland swamp forest looks like. Lots of trees, lots of roots, lots of water, and probably lots of aquatic life. So it's quite a specialized area, and probably quite an area that's under a lot of pressure from drainage, farming, deforestation. So probably quite a unique habitat that's disappearing fast. Having said that, records show that hairy-nosed otters don't always occur in this environment. Once I started looking into the papers, there were some that were found in quite dense non-riverine jungle habitats, up quite high altitudes, kind of a mixture of different varying environments. So whether that was because they were being pushed out of their environments, their natural environments, or whether they were actually more adaptable and more widespread than we formerly knew, that's a question we need to answer. But let's go back a bit, right back all the way to about 1822. I like to start at the beginning, and I like a good puzzle. So when looking at this species, I was kind of starting to look at recent journals, recent papers, of which there's a few, but not that many. And because there wasn't that many in total, I decided to go right the way back. So the guy in the picture is Thomas Stamford Raffles. You've probably heard of him. Very prominent kind of zoologist, colonialist. He had dealings in starting up going back to Singapore and the East India Company. So quite a well-known figure back in the day, quite an important figure. Started the Zoological Society of London and was a very, very thorough zoologist. So he recorded a lot of what he did in terms of finding species. And around that time, there were certain other explorers around the world going about, and this picture came up, and this picture keeps coming up because it's quite common on the internet. And I kind of started looking into it in terms of, okay, where did it come from? And clearly at the bottom it says Lutra sumatrana, and Gray, who's the person who first officially described it. And in looking back at it, and if you look on the top right hand corner, you'll see Yunnan expedition plate. Yunnan is a province in southern China which borders Myanmar and Laos. So I think this needs certainly looking into. There's no reported cases ever or evidence ever that hairy-nosed otters lived in China, in Yunnan, but you never know. Are we just not looking at them? Have we not found them yet? Were they there once historically? If so, what sort of environment is it? Is it peat swamp forest? Is it another type of forest? So yeah, it's kind of, when you start looking at little bits of information and actually looking back at them and through them and studying them a little bit closer, you start to pick up a few key bits of information you could start putting together about this animal. So back to Raffles, he was the first person to describe it, and this is a section of his description. In this work, descriptive catalogue of zoological collection made on account of the Honourable East India Company in the island of Sumatra and its vicinity. And this was before London Zoo existed. So this is 1822, about 4 years before London Zoo and the Zoological Society of London came into being. But they were still doing a lot of work. They were still discovering things. They were still recording things. And as you can see, initially recorded in Sumatra in 1822 by Raffles as Barang. It was before the actual name Lutra sumatrana was instigated or used. We fast forward a little bit, 1846. This is quite interesting, this one. So this is from a Proceedings of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. So another group of lovely Victorian, probably gentlemen back in those days, discussing things and zoology one warm evening, probably. And it's quite interesting to read this. Again, Sumatra, Borneo, and it seems to kind of give an idea that they were actually potentially quite common. It says the young are very playful, soon become sufficiently domesticated to roam about the house. I'm not sure I want an otter roaming around the house. Appear when called, and its voice, a short shrill whistling. I've never actually heard in all the camera trap footage, video footage, what noise they make. But it's quite interesting. The muzzle is hairy, but in old animals, the hairs become rubbed off. So that, again, this indicates that they had a good, this wasn't just a one-off sighting. They were around. Hairy-nosed otters existed, and they existed as house pets. They existed as older animals, and potentially they were being kept for some time as pets, or they were known to kind of survive a lot longer, possibly in human care. So to me, that's quite interesting, because if people were keeping them alive, why can't we do it now? What's going wrong now? Also, quite interesting that it says about the size difference in this one. Malayan individuals appear to attain greater size than Sumatran. That's quite interesting. Are there different subspecies? Was it just a one-off? Do they only collect a couple? Again, all these questions kind of go into the back of my head and kind of get put in a box to be sorted out later, and about collecting information as much as I can. Move on a bit more. So John Edward Gray was the first person to officially describe the species in 1865. He was actually quite a famous man back in the day. He worked for 30 years in the British Museum, which housed all the zoological collections in London up until about 1881, when it was all moved to the building on the right there, which is the British Natural History Museum, which just houses all the zoological collections from then on. So Gray described it. He described it under Barangia, and an extract from the Proceedings of the Zoological Society of London in 1865 again gives us a few hints as to what they were looking at. They were looking at skins in the Natural History Museum, going through the skins, making a firm, definite account, and then recording it for kind of scientific research back in the day. So it wasn't, it had been found. They knew they were out there, and it was a known species. But even just looking at that page, that's all there is. It's a very, very brief snapshot into a species. There's not a lot of information. And back in the 1800s, for most of the papers, that's pretty much it. That's all we're getting. We're not getting a lot more information. So we go back to our lovely hairy-nosed again, which came around about the same time. And then if we flip forward slightly, this is an IUCN map, the range map on the IUCN Red List website. It's quite broad. It covers roughly the same area as my peat swamp map. You've got Malaysia, Thailand there, you've got Cambodia, Borneo for sure, Western Sumatra, little bit patch up in Vietnam. And then if you look right at the top of the map, above Myanmar, Burma, where it says that country name, there's a splodge up there. And if you were to go a little bit further north, you'd be into Yunnan, China. But it's quite interesting. It's quite a fragmented population. And we think that's declining rapidly. We think that has shrunk an awful lot over the last, certainly 100 years. But that's the map we have to work with today. Now I'm going to jump straight into this one. This is part of my stud book. And if we look at the little blob up in Myanmar, in Burma, I started looking into this because this is kind of an isolated population. And it's just one report. So it was just one wild specimen that was shot in 1939. And the skin was collected by a guy called Ronald Colback. And he took it to the British Natural History Museum. And the page you're seeing now is from my stud book. And this was part of the EEP process. This is part of the information gathering. So as we find each specimen, I'm trying to log it, record it. And as you can see in green, it's a museum specimen and it's a preserved skin. And if you look slightly down on the page, you'll see the details of where it's come from. So Myanmar, Kachin province, the guy that collected it, and at the bottom there, British Museum Natural History, BMNH, and it's lot number, so it's identification number. So if anybody in the future wants to know where this skin came from, where it is now, it's an easily accessible kind of way of finding it rather than trawling through Google and endless bits of scanned in Victorian paperwork or 1930s paperwork, should I say. So this sighting, or this find, should I say, was part of a study by a very good colleague of mine, Mr. Duckworth, Will Duckworth, who's an IUCN Red List specialist. He mainly operated, possibly still does, out in Laos, Southeast Asia. He is an absolute mind of information, a bit of a legend. He's partly responsible why I do what I do. He's a guy I really look up to. Anyway, he looked at this skin and kind of did a little bit more digging around, and there are the details of this skin's origin. So it came from Myanmar. It was shot on the 6th of April 1939. And if you look a little bit further down, it says there is no plausible alternative explanation for the skin at this location other than the species inhabiting this area. Validating the species' presence there may now be impossible because of a massive recent trade-driven declines of all otters there, as are occurring wildly in mainland Southeast Asia. So they may already be gone from Myanmar. We just don't know. But it's certainly something I think needs to be looked into. With many species, they are still out there. It's just nobody's able to look for them, or nobody is looking for them, which is a bit of a problem. So to sum up so far, what do we know? First described by Raffles, 1822. Geographic range, not clear. They seem to pop up in various locations. New papers, new research, new camera trap sightings are always appearing. So we're finding them certainly within Cambodia and Thailand, Malaysia, Borneo. We know they're out there. We just kind of need to start putting together exactly their entire range. They were actually, interestingly, declared extinct or considered extinct up until about 1999. None had been found, I think, in about 10 years. And they were rediscovered in Thailand. 3 cubs were found. Unfortunately, they all died, but it was proof that they were still living. They hadn't gone extinct. So that's quite interesting that for a period of time, they thought they had completely gone. Current IUCN listing is endangered. We'll get onto that in a little bit. We know we've got 4 confirmed known captive otters, although we think there might be more out there in private zoos, particularly in Indonesia and Cambodia. There is a slight concern that I have that as the species becomes more known about, and its rarity becomes more known about, that tends to make the dealers and the people that have these private zoos a little bit more interested in obtaining the species, which is a real concern. We know they have a very high mortality rate in captivity. Very few, I think less than 6 outside of Phnom Penh in Cambodia have been kept in captivity, and all those have died quite frequently. Again, this is something I looked into quite frequently with gastric problems, with stomach problems. Has finished them off, which is not good. And pretty much 100% of cubs coming into rescues are failing to survive. Most are confiscations from the pet trade. They're just not making it, or they're disappearing, so we don't know where they're going. IUCN, usually a very good source of finding out how endangered things are or how common things are. As you can see with hairy-nosed otters, insufficiently known. Somebody decided it was vulnerable in 1996. Then we got up to data deficient in 2000, 2004. Very kind of sporadic and worrying kind of trend. We've now got them as endangered because we are finding them. I think that's mainly because of camera trapping and a lot more research going on. But still, we have no definitive answer on how many there are in the wild. If we go back to papers, research papers, this is quite an interesting one. So this gives you the years and roughly how many papers there are out on the species or mention the species as part of a paper. Total is about 44. If you compare that to, say, Lutra, a quick Google search will throw up about 2,300 scientific research papers on Lutra. If you do it for short-clawed otters, several hundred. So only 44, roughly, from about 1878 is quite slim pickings there. And if we start going through those papers, those documents, what we generally find is keywords of first recent record, current and historic distribution, new records, new observation, review, new information on illegal otter trade, wildlife market, status, conservation. It's a very kind of slim remit that these papers are having. It's great that they're finding new observations and new records. On the flip side, it's also very worrying that they're appearing in the illegal trade. So it's kind of a very fine line of research that's being done in terms of the species. And there's not a lot on its biology, how it lives, whether it lives in groups, singly, territory size, diet, all that sort of thing. It's very, very slim on that kind of information side of things, which is what I'm starting to look into and what I'm starting to gather if I can. It's not that easy. While all this was going on, I kind of decided to look at the CITES trade database just to see if there were any being moved around or if any had been kind of live specimens had been exported anywhere, so I could kind of look to see where they'd gone, if they'd ended up in zoos, and if they were kept alive, who kept them alive, if there was any information on them. Unfortunately, all the live ones on this page, I have no idea where they went, which is particularly worrying for the top one. So the exporter is Indonesia, the importer is Great Britain, 15 live hairy-nosed otters. I do all the historic records for pretty much all the otters in the UK in zoos. I have never come across one instance of a hairy-nosed otter being kept in captivity in the UK, which is, where do they go? What on earth happened to those 15 live hairy-nosed otters? It could be it was a misidentification. It could be that they were Lutra. It could be that they were short claws, smooth coated. I don't know. If we go down a little bit, there was a next live one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. One came from Indonesia. Exporter was Great Britain. It ended up in Nigeria, which is a very bizarre situation for an animal like that to be transported to Nigeria. Again, I have no idea where that went. If you go a bit further down, you'll see 1,000 skins. For an animal that's hardly ever seen, that only turns up in ones or twos, if rarely, and then only as cubs. To have 1,000 skins going from Germany to Austria is, I think that is a big mistake. I think that has to be Lutra. and possibly with most of the others as well, except for the specimens and some of the skins. Potentially they would be, but it kind of, it's false data. It's not helping the system. It's not helping us. It's not helping anyone. So certainly with CITES, we have had meetings with CITES to see if they can do a little bit better in species identification, exactly what otter species are being moved around and traded. It's not that easy to tell them apart if you don't know what you're looking at, and particularly for somebody in CITES that potentially sits in an office and only moves paperwork around, or has a microchip number to go and no actual physical picture to look at, it could potentially be a problem. So I think one thing we could do is push CITES to kind of, if you're moving otters around and it's flagged as a Sumatra, Lutra Sumatra, ask for a photo, get some identification, and be a little bit more strict about it. This bit taken from a paper, was put on the IUCN OSG bulletin, was from 2008. And again, this is, you know, it's one paper. It was a paper that was only about 3 that were made that year for the otter, hairy-nosed. It's now 18 years old, and Leslie and the others, Butsabong, were concerned then, 18 years ago. You know, further research is very important, but practical and immediate protective actions are vital. Even back then, we were worried, and still nothing technically has moved on that quickly in terms of protection, or kind of a cohesive approach. There are probably more people working on a Saola or certainly other species directly than there are hairy-nosed otters. So key concerns with the species: misidentification when rescued, rehabilitated. We don't know what's coming in. What is coming in, we're losing. CITES misidentification. Unidentified when part of the illegal pet trade. Extremely high mortality rate within the trade and once rescued. Basic lack of knowledge on husbandry. I covered that earlier. You know, yes, they are otters. There must be something very different about them to make them not survive. Possibly they're environmentally sensitive. They also might suffer from post-capture myopathy. They might be a highly stressed animal. From a zoo perspective, there are species you just cannot keep in captivity. Great white sharks, Tibetan wolves, things like that. It might be the hairy-nosed are the same. Over the last few years, we've had Alston's civets in the UK, and there was a great attempt at breeding them, at getting them breeding. It didn't work. It failed. We then changed tack, and we decided that the powers that be decided that it would be better to breed them and have a center in range countries. So in Vietnam, they set up a breeding center, and the baby boom has gone through the roof. You know, they're doing really well. So it has to be in range, has to be in situ. It works. It's no good us Western zoos trying to take the lead. It has to be range country led. It has to be led by the people that are actually working on the ground in those countries for it to succeed. And I think this is something that would have to be done with hairy-nosed if any came into captivity. On the positive side, it's not all doom and gloom. So the camera traps are coming along very well. Vanessa from Cambodia kindly let me share this image for the previous presentation I've done. Camera trap footage of a hairy-nosed otter in Cambodia. Little wins like this are always very good. It's always nice to see them in the wild. But again, it's an image. It says so much, but at the same time, it doesn't give us enough. Clearly, that's a youngster. Clearly, that's one back end of another adult. You know, do we have more? Do they live in groups? Does the female bring them up on her own? Are they family orientated? It's stuff like this that we really need to know. So the more camera trapping we can do, and the more kind of funds we can raise to help support that and support in situ field research is all the better. And it's certainly the younger generation need to be kind of aware of this. They have so much potential to kind of get involved, sift through camera trap images. A lot of camera trapping, particularly we found, is kind of for the big iconic species. So they'll be out there looking for tigers and elephants and rhinos. particularly in places like Sumatra, where you've got Sumatran rhino and tigers, and the field researchers are only looking for those species. Otters are just a bycatch. So if you're young and you've got a bit of time to spare, I'd highly suggest contacting some places that are doing camera trapping and getting involved and kind of looking to see if you can actually go through some of the footage and start looking for otters, which are clearly there, but they're just being kind of not pushed aside, but the right people aren't looking for them. Again, back to the sad side, the bad side. These hairy-nosed are from the illegal trade, posted on Facebook for sale. We don't know whether that most of the stuff that comes in through the trade is in Java, although we don't actually think they live in Java. So again, they're probably being moved around. I have noticed that a couple of years ago, they were just put up as otters, baby barang for sale. Now the dealers and people are becoming aware. They know what they've got. They command a higher price. And other people are kind of commenting saying, you know, you have got a hairy-nosed otter. They are protected. You can't sell them. So will that push the price up, and will it push it more underground? We just don't know. But again, several instances we've kind of tried to report these sales, and we've tried to get people involved on the ground, confiscation officers, police, local rescue centres, and pretty much by the time they track it down, the otter's gone or the person has disappeared. We just can't find them, which is a real shame. This one's quite an interesting one. This is a picture taken of a video I took. It was an online trade sale. And this is an adult hairy-nosed otter in a tank of water being sold, offered for sale. It was offered for sale as either live or for meat. But it was taken in Vientiane in Laos. They're not supposed to live there. We don't know that they live there. If it's such a highly sensitive species, I can't imagine an adult otter being transported in the back of a car in a tank would last very long to get it all the way to the capital city of Laos. So again, it's an enigma. Where did this otter come from? Is it a local? Is the trade that bad that they are coming across from Myanmar or Cambodia or Vietnam? We just don't know. But again, tried reporting this on social media. No interest at all. Doesn't breach their community standards. It's a very, very hard lose on that one, because the otter obviously wouldn't have survived. And again, it's another one gone. These three were some young ones. They were actually rescued in Sumatra. We worked with the guys that rescued them so hard to try and bring them through, to help them survive. Grace from International Otter Survival Fund was also heavily involved in this. With our combined knowledge, we thought we could kind of help them survive, bring them around, give them the best care. We know the people on the ground were doing their absolute best to give them the best care. At least 2 of them died, and I'm pretty sure the 3rd one died as well, not long after they were caught. They did fairly well, fairly good, reasonably, for a short period of time, and then they just died. It's you know, it's heartbreaking, and that is something we have to change. We have to learn why we're not keeping them. And then if you look at the video, it looks healthy. It's eating. It's not too skinny. Yeah, something must be going on that does not mean they do well in captivity. The ones we do know about, we've got obviously one in Wildlife Friends Foundation Thailand. It was a pet that was handed over. Oreo, he was handed over with an Asian short-clawed otter. As far as I know, he's still doing well. He was handed over in 2023. I must admit, it's quite hard getting contact with some of these places and trying to learn how they're keeping them. They're not so keen to share information for whatever reason, which doesn't do conservation any good. It doesn't do the species any good. So if anybody is listening that's in Thailand and that wants to go and approach them and ask to kind of do a bit of research on them, and see how they're keeping this Oreo alive, it would be fantastic. The other centre that has done very well with them is Phnom Thmao Rescue Centre in Cambodia, headed up by a guy called Nick Marks. Nick has been absolutely fantastic. He's an extremely busy man, but every time I email him, every time I ask for information, he is so willing to help out and give it. He agrees that they are environmentally sensitive, and they are a very difficult species to keep in captivity. But again, I don't think that much official research has been collated and brought together in terms of how they're keeping them alive, what they're eating, what the enclosures like. I know they use natural water systems. They don't use tap water. Is this a factor? So again, it's something I would really like to go out and study, or if anybody is interested and that is in that area, it would be fantastic to learn a little bit more about how Nick and the team are keeping the hairy-nosed otters alive. So key positive points an EAZA EP will bring. There's a little list there. So it's basically about bringing everybody together, bringing people together, certainly within the zoo world and in with the rescue centre world, and kind of supporting in situ research and studies. And if we can get some money funding going for the species, that would be great. And just kind of collating the information so it's there and it's useful as a kind of a one point of contact for everything you need for hairy-nosed otters. And going back to the stud book, difference between my hairy-nosed one and my Asian short-clawed one is vast, as you can see. I have 9,164 Asian short-clawed otters in my stud book. If you go to Lutra sumatrana, I have 7, and that's it. And these 7 are a mixture of captive animals, and they are a mixture of the one I showed earlier that was in Myanmar. The 3 rescued ones are in Thailand. And this hopefully will grow as I kind of dig deeper and find more information and log the information. And then we can start seeing screens like this. So this one is for one of the ones that was found in Thailand in 1999. So the kind of the rediscovered 3 cubs. And again, it's just kind of a point of reference. It kind of puts all the information in one place. So we've got the location, the green tabs there. We can kind of remove some of those because we know it's an abandoned cub. So the first one can stay, the rest can go. We can also then kind of filter this down in the future to see how many live wild sightings we get, how many rescued pets we're getting, how many camera trap images we're getting all in one place. So if scientists and researchers want an easy access point where they can kind of view everything all in one place, my stud book will hopefully help with that. And what the IUCN Otter Specialist Group needs to do, what we need to do from the IUCN is basically consolidate everybody. We have come a long way. We are kind of rallying the troops. We are getting together. And there is more work being done, which is a great thing. And I feel very, very honored and privileged to kind of be part of that, even if it's small. I think I'm the only person in our core group that does ex situ work as our main body. Most of the rest of the group is in situ. They're the people out there in range countries, on the ground, doing the mapping, doing the surveying in the rescue centers, which is absolutely awesome. It's fantastic that we can, in today's technology, we can kind of work like that. And WhatsApp is the biggest key to all this. We have a little WhatsApp group going on, 16 experts from across all range countries and me. And key players in that group, Professor Anna Loy, you all know, Caroline Wu-Chi-Young, Dr. Hiroshi from Japan, who has got a very, very keen interest in hairy-nosed otters. He's currently in Malaysia, I think, hoping to find them or look for them or study them. Reza's in Indonesia. And the other people in that group. We share photos, we share videos, we kind of pull things together. And Anna and some of the others have actually now started a paper to kind of log and catalog and kind of go through, re-review all the current 20 years or so data on hairy nose. So they've kindly let me share this map from that paper. It hasn't been published yet. And all the little red dots are all the little points where a hairy-nosed otter has been seen, I think, within the last 20 years, which is good. It's coming together. And yeah, hopefully it will grow. And over time, we will get more red dots and we'll be able to have a little bit more of a better idea of where we can target our conservation. Certainly Malaysia there, Cambodia and Borneo, a little bit in Sumatra. It will be good to kind of get some dedicated projects going. Current collaborations is quite a wide remit, even though there's not many people in the world that are doing hairy-nosed otters. They're scattered, few and far between, but they are such lovely people, and they really care about the species. And you know, I think hopefully it will grow, and particularly as this is Otter Youth Circle, I cannot encourage enough young folk to get involved. There is so much camera trap footage out there. There are so many scattered bits of paper, records, research that can be done on this species. So much support that can be given. And from my point of view, you never know where you're going to end up. Starters, I never thought I would end up working with otters. I certainly never thought I'd end up championing 4 species of otters in Southeast Asia. So if you've got an interest in otters and that's kind of your career line, it's an endless, bottomless barrel of fun, information, interest. Yeah, I'd highly recommend getting involved if you can. Yeah, thank you for listening. A few special thanks there, my core team, as it were, that around the world that help me and put up with me and support me. If anybody has any questions, hopefully there'll be some in the group chat. I will hand over back to Maya and Simon and Max, if that's okay.
That is totally okay. Thank you, Jason, for the great talk and all the inspiring bits of work that you do.
Thank you.
And as a zoo colleague, I'm especially thrilled that you presented today and also shared all your experience on the importance of ex situ work. And maybe that's where I would like to start, because I think that many of our attendees are not that familiar with how the ex situ world works. And you mentioned already that there's breeding programs on different levels. And maybe you can just very shortly sum up again, like what's the importance of these ex situ breeding programs, mainly in zoos, for the in situ situation of an animal like the hairy-nosed otter?
Sure. Obviously, if you're outside of the zoo world, if you're outside of the ex situ world, you often look in and think zoos breed animals and then hopefully send them back to the wild. In an ideal world, we'd be doing that a lot more, and for some species it has worked. But our zoo global community, as it were, works very cohesively. So a good example with this is if we take Asian short-clawed otters. I champion that species. I love that species. But at the end of the day, there are far too many Asian short-clawed otters in our zoos. They're overpopulated. And with many zoo animals, you see them everywhere. It's lovely, but from a conservation point of view, it's not ideal. So part of my remit is to kind of reduce that population, kind of pull it in a bit, rein it in a bit, and then replace those Asian short-clawed otters with other species. We can use a good example of smooth-coated otters. Very few are kept in zoos. They're under a great deal of pressure in the wild. They are declining rapidly. They're a wetland species. The more zoos we can have housing them, it acts as an ark population, which in the future, if it's needed, it's there. But at the same time, what we can do is with our ark population of any animal, we can study it, we can research it in a safe environment, we can learn from it. We can then send that information back in situ. So if cubs are turning up in the wild, if, for example, I can use an example of somebody in India was finding certain behavior in some otters they were filming, camera trapping, and they contacted me to say, have you seen this behavior in the zoo? Is it common? What does it mean? The zoo world has so much knowledge and so much information that we can actually feed that back into the people in the field and support them. It's very hard. It's a very different environment working in the field, particularly if you're working in a hot, dense tropical rainforest. Everything's wet, everything's sweaty, everything breaks down because of the humidity. You might only get 2 seconds of camera trap footage, whatever. If there's somebody the other side of the world that can go, actually, I can confirm that for you, or actually, can you change things slightly and you'll get a better result? That might help. It can only be a good thing. So the zoo community can support in situ so much, and particularly with Otter Youth Circle, get involved with your local zoo. Most of them will have otters. If you like otters, there's always a research project to be done. There's always some observation to be done. It's there. It's kind of waiting. And just don't feel that's not important. Whatever you do, if you write it up as a paper, OSG, IUCN, bulletin, it's there. It's there for everybody to use, and it will make a difference. It does make a difference.
Thank you. I think that explained it very well, and I'm sure that many people will contact you after the webinar, trying to work with you, maybe also on a scientific base. Okay, then there are some questions that are somehow related to that, husbandry part that you also explained.
Yep.
And for example, one question was that you already explained it's very difficult for now to keep hairy-nosed otters in holdings. And you mentioned that there are some gastric pathologies. Can you think of any way to adapt the husbandry to an extent that we can address these? And do you know of this pathology in any other species of otter that you have come across?
Not that I know of. I mean, otters occasionally suffer from gastric problems, but generally otters are quite tough. They can eat a lot of stuff, and it doesn't bother them. The gastric problems, I had some communication with Nick Marks about this, and the historic ones I looked at, there was some, I think, Bronx Zoo in New York. They'd actually had a hairy-nosed otter come in. I think it was misidentified as a smooth coat, and it just turned up in a random shipment, late 1960s, early 1970s. And they were very helpful, but again, they said it died of gastric problems. So potentially we have such a small data snippet of this, it might be a problem, it might not be a problem. But my thinking is, if they are environmentally sensitive and they require a certain habitat, certain water conditions, certain food items, that may be a problem. So if we can find out exactly what water type they live in and exactly what food they eat, and particularly with the ones that are in captivity now, what species of fish are they being fed? What are they being fed? They're obviously okay on it. They're surviving on it. If we can find that out, it will help so much, because then that information can be passed to the rescue centres and go out and buy this type of fish or that type of fish, and don't buy this, that, or the other. It's such a small thing, but it's a very important thing.
That also answers a question that I had in mind. So you're not accepting the fact that we cannot keep them now. You want to work on finding out, like, how can we make husbandry work?
I think so. I'm quite confident. I look after 4 species of otter, and I look after a lot of otters around the world. We come up with problems. We solve those problems. Otters generally are quite tough as a taxa anyway. There must be something in the back of my head. There must be something that we're missing with hairy-nosed otters, that we're not getting quite right. And if you look back at giant otters, even Asian short-clawed otters, when they were first coming into captivity, it's very high mortality. Giant otters would only live 8, 10, 12 years, not very good at breeding. And Asian short-claws were virtually impossible to breed until Philip Ware and the Otter Trust got it right in the 1970s, changed the diet, changed the husbandry, and then boom, population explosion. So I think it's the same with the hairy-nosed. It's possibly something completely different, but I think it's a minor tweak. It's something we don't know about that species biology that we need to learn to be able to change it.
Okay. So we definitely need more research, as you already mentioned.
Yes. Yeah.
And maybe just as a note, from my time doing necropsies on Eurasian otters, I remember that I had the occasional rehabbed otter, mostly cubs, coming in, and they also showed gastric lesions. So I think it's definitely stress related.
Yeah, yeah, and we had that again. We had that with some smooth coats that came in to save Vietnam's wildlife. They just did not do well, and it was a gastric problem. It was, I think, also, don't quote me on this, but I think on post-mortem they had gastric lesions and they had all sorts of problems internally. And we think that's because it took too long to get them to the rescue center and they basically stressed out.
Yeah, likely. Okay. There was another question on the sensitivity of hairy-nosed otters, since you mentioned that they might be more sensitive to human disturbance, and also a comment related to that, that it's interesting, since you mentioned that they have been kind of tamed a couple of hundred years ago. Is there something you can say to that?
Yes, potentially. I think back in the Victorian times, things were a lot simpler. Possibly explorers, people coming from the West would have lived in possibly local housing. Our society, our environment, our habitat as humans has vastly changed in the last 150 years. So whether that has an impact, and I suppose in simple terms, do they just need a simple life, these hairy-nosed otters? If you were to keep one out in the forest, in a small cabin, or in a local village, I would probably say it will probably have a better chance than being taken into a capital city or somewhere where there's a high population. I don't know.
Okay, we'll keep it at that. There's more questions coming in. So there is already people who are volunteering to review camera footage for you. And
not yet,
there's
but I think it's definitely something I'd like to start up, and I'd like to start putting people out there in touch with places that are camera trapping, and started making connections and saying, okay, you're camera trapping for Sumatran rhinos and Sumatran tigers or tapirs in Malaysia. Can you possibly take this student or this young person and allow them access to some of your footage and actually see if you're getting any otters, and recording what species of otter?
okay. I mean, you shared your email, right? So the
Yes,
attendees will
yes.
have your contact and they can get in
Yeah.
touch.
I mean, I suppose
Okay.
it does depend entirely on where the people are coming from, in terms of where are they in Europe, or are they in range countries, or where the camera trapping is taking place. But I'm sure certainly within the OSG, there's enough connections there to make a connection, and start putting people in touch. I think we've also, we mentioned this for Africa as well. The African otters, obviously, surveying African otters is quite hard. And I've mentioned this previously about, okay, there's loads of camera trapping in Africa going on with the big five, with lions, with cheetahs. And I had a request the other day. I also sit on a lion conservation charity advisory board, and we've got a project going out in Tanzania, and the guy out there is trying to survey lions and see how many lions he's got in his national park, in simple terms. But they've asked us, is only one guy, can we start looking at the camera trap footage and identifying prey species? And I said absolutely yes, because if that means I start coming across some otters, and then I can then feed that back to the guys who are doing otters in Africa, it starts making a link.
Right. Okay, so I think we will just do two more questions.
Okay.
Maybe one that is related to what you were just talking about. The question is whether there's other techniques that could be used to prove presence of hairy-nosed otters next to camera traps.
Yeah, so you've got eDNA, which is working quite well. There's a lot of stuff going on with eDNA in the rivers, picking that up. I know that's being done in certainly India, Nepal. You've also got things like, I think it's FitTrack, that do the footprints. So they'll go out and take pictures of footprints, and from that footprint, and we did a lot of work with this with otters, with the 3 species we have, because the idea was to start doing that in Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, we can't get any hairy-nosed otter footprints, or it would be quite hard. So that you need the data to kind of feed that into the analytics to get the parameters set out. But yeah, it doesn't have to be camera traps. It can be other forms of research. But again, hairy-nosed otters, it's unfortunately, it's the bottom of a long list of other species that are being more prioritized, which is fair enough. You know, Lutra is having a hard time in Southeast Asia, and there are a lot more people working on Lutra, way more than there are hairy-nosed otters, Lutra sumatrana. But again, if we can start talking to those people and kind of pushing our hairy-nosed agenda that way, it would be helpful.
Makes sense. Okay, and then maybe the last question before we close is whether you think that there's a difference in breeding otters ex situ that are deemed for rewilding compared to such that stay in captivity.
Yes, definitely. At our center, we historically did a lot of rescue and rehab for our native British Lutra. They have to be looked after and cared for completely differently to our ex situ zoo populations. Otters are extremely intelligent and they know what people are. And unfortunately, they can be dangerous if you start breeding a zoo population and pop it out into the wild. Probably a good example of that is the otters in Singapore, completely wild, and that's the way they should be. And the temptation to go near them or have too much human contact should be avoided, because human wildlife conflict, particularly with otters, that I should say show no mercy and have a lot of courage and confidence when it comes to humans. They don't back down. So yeah, a certain wariness or fear of humans, if you're breeding them for wild release, is definitely a must.
Okay, thank you, Jason, for bridging both in situ and ex situ tonight, wherever we are. And before we close, I would encourage everyone attending to switch on the camera so we can take a group picture. And Max, you can tell me once it's done. Very good.
If 10 more seconds.
Okay. We're done? Perfect. Thank you, Max. All right. Thanks, everyone, for attending. We wish you a good day, a good night, good morning.